Welcome to the Everybody Matters podcast. This show is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. Don't forget to connect with us on the web at Barry-Wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. John Lennon once sang, "Nobody told me there'd be days like these. Strange days indeed." And indeed, these are strange days. Many of you listening to this episode across the world are sheltering in place due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is an exceptional and uncertain time. In some ways, it feels like the world is stopped, but that's really not the case. Now, many retail businesses and businesses in the service industry, like restaurants, have had to shut their doors, not knowing whether they'll weather this crisis and be able to reopen. Many other large and small companies are trying to make tough decisions that are best for their business and hopefully, ultimately, best for their people. As Barry-Wehmiller CEO Bob Chapman says, true leadership is demonstrated in tough times, not good times. And these are certainly tough times for a lot of businesses and industries in the world. Sara and Matt Wyatt are the managing and founding partners of the Chapman & Co. Leadership Institute, Barry-Wehmiller's consulting arm that helps other companies develop leaders, create strategic visions, improve corporate culture, and engage their people. Chapman & Co. have a number of resources for leadership to help guide them through these extraordinary times on their website, ccoleadership.com. And Matt and Sara recently hosted a couple of webinars to give leaders a deep dive into acting with compassion, communicating clearly to their people, and making decisions intentionally while treading these uncertain waters. So here's an edited version of one of those webinars. And it's a really good resource to think about how you're going to lead in an uncertain and difficult time. So here's Sara and Matt Wyatt.
Before we give you all some tactical things on how you can lead during this time, let's talk about the time period that we're in. And most of us, as Matt mentions, are experiencing quite a bit of change. So what I want you to do is I want you to think about two changes that you've experienced actually in your past. And so I don't want you to pick a current one. We're in the middle of it. I want you to think about something that has happened in your past. The first one that I want you to think of is a change that you chose, something that was 100% in your control. As an example, a change that I chose was choosing to move to St. Louis from Fairbanks, Alaska. It was a 4,000-mile move, but it was completely something that I, brought upon myself. And then the second one that I want you to think about is a change that was inflicted on you. You didn't really have a say in. So an example for myself is just before I was about to make that move, about 2 weeks before I was about to get on an airplane, I ended up in the hospital. Spent 4 days in the hospital, disrupted a lot of the plans that I had. So that's a change that was inflicted on me. So I want you to hold in your mind, one, a change that you chose, and two, a change that was inflicted on you. It can be personal or professional. Once you have it, I want you to hold that change that you chose first in your mind. And I want you to think about what your first reaction was, not what you ultimately did, but you made the choice, and I want to know your default response. Was it A, hell yes, ready to go? I chose it, I'm ready to go. B, maybe I'm going to need some more information. As C, man the cannons, or actively resist. Or D, oh no, this is terrifying. The majority of people are ready to go, something that I had complete control over, therefore I'm ready to go, but we still see people who are sitting in the other categories. Now we're going to switch over to the change that was inflicted on you. And again, I'm going to ask you to think about what was your first reaction. So the first thought that goes into your mind once you hear of this change inflicted on you. Am I ready to go? Am I going to need more information? Am I going to actively resist? Or perhaps this is terrifying. There's a handful of us that I didn't choose it, but I'm still completely adaptable and I'm ready to go. We see an increase in the people who say I need more information. We see an increase in people who actively resist. And we certainly see an increase in people who say this is terrifying. And so what does this exercise reveal to us about how people process change? One of the things that we know and what people will say when we do this in person is, well, different people will react to the exact same change in different ways. And this is fair. If you think about a major life event, say a divorce, for some of us, perfectly fine. Wanted it, chose it, all good. And for some people, it's terrifying. And so that is a human quality of change. However, we also know there's a huge difference between things that I have control over and things that are inflicted on me. It's safe to say most of us on this call are in the position of having a lot of change that's inflicted on us, not change that we chose. And so that begs the question, as leaders in organizations, what percent of change efforts actually fail? And so according to HBR and McKinsey research in organizations, 70%. Another way to say it is the vast majority of change efforts fail due to employee resistance. Now, we certainly have a burning platform given kind of the current circumstance that we're in, but we can't ignore the fact that we need all the human beings in our organizations to increase the resiliency, become more adaptable, and essentially move through change. But we need to realize what's happening to each of us when we are processing change. First step is we become aware. Either feedback is delivered, a new policy is announced, and we use the terminology, you enter into the box. So I receive the change, I enter into the box, and the first thing that's going to happen is I'm going to have some type of emotion about it. Likely, if it's a change that I did not choose, that emotion is going to fall into the category of anxiety, perhaps fear, perhaps I'm mildly resistant. I will then move to, I'm going to rationalize the change for myself. And what that looks like is I start to think thoughts like, okay, this is how I could perhaps make this change work. Then I buy in emotionally. I start to attach slightly more positive emotions to it. Then I prepare to respond, and then I leave the box and I'm ready for action. The surefire way to sabotage the change process is to essentially skip from awareness to action. And where we see this happen in organizations is you have perhaps your HR leader, perhaps it's the leadership team, perhaps whoever was huddled in a conference room trying to hammer out your plan to address the situation that we're currently in. You had a lot of time to essentially move through the box. We announce things to the organization, and sometimes we have this expectation, okay, let's all move to action. Well, our teams haven't had the same opportunity to essentially move through the box. Some of the most helpful things that you can say is, I understand that you're processing this. I want to give you the amount of time that we have available to us, then I'm going to check back in with you. It's a simple way of saying, I know you're in the box, and I'm going to show up to you where you're at. The balance of this webinar is essentially going to be, what are the tools from a mindset standpoint, from a tactical standpoint that we can do to help facilitate the change process when we're all essentially facing kind of the same situation. The three are act with compassion, communicate clearly, and decide intentionally.
As we start with the act with compassion, we're going to start with your values. So you put some time into putting these values down for your organization. If you're to define what a value is, it's one's judgment of what is important in life. Values the same for an organization. What's important to us, it acts as a filter, it acts as a guidepost, as a North Star. So one, reference the values poster somewhere in your organization, or click on the who are we on your website. You put those in good times probably, but this is when they're actually served really, really well. We use them as a filter for all decision making. I'm not saying that you would change the decision, but it's top of mind if I'm thinking about what are our values. Now, how does this decision link between those two? And before jumping into tactics about what you're going to do, ask if we're going to respond in support of our values, how should we act? And in our communications, we start with them because we value people, or whatever it might be in your organization, because we care for people, because we want to show up to serve. Here's how we're going to act. Let's make this more tactical. And a do, don't do, say, don't say. So I'm going to say, hey, since we believe in a list of value versus according to our HR policy directives, I'm going to start by saying, how does this align or misalign with our values? Instead of saying there's a time for values, there's a time for business. I get for a lot of organizations, we're at the Maslow's hierarchy of need here. I just need to survive. The values allow us in that survival mode to act in accordance with what we believe to be valuable. I want to highlight this team member in recognition according to this value versus, it drives me crazy when I see the pictures of everybody on a boat rowing the same direction. Doesn't help. let's just talk about, I want to encourage behaviors I want to see more of. I'm going to say that in the value. Also from a do versus don't do, I'm going to be interested in where we are or are not living our values, especially now when perhaps for a lot of you, I've distributed a lot of my workforce to a lot of different places. But I have people at home, ask them to print this out or have it on their screensaver. Don't ask them to refer to your website. Have it top of mind for them because they're going to be asked to be making a lot of different decisions and talking with customers and clients. Having that top of mind is important. The last one there is have you use it as a North Star, a guidepost for culture and decisions to all stakeholders, people, the customers, shareholders perhaps, not just using your values solely to say the customer is number one and working with them. For some of you know this book. This is a book that we wrote. It's the story about Barry-Wehmiller. And one of the stories they have in there, and I'm not going to belabor this part because it is different, and Barry-Wehmiller is probably different in some aspects than your organization. During the 08-09 downturn, Barry-Wehmiller is faced with their entire business model changing and financial pressures that started to talk about, can we actually be good to the people that are in our span of care, that are employed by us? And so rather than having one division take layoffs, it was decided that they call it shared sacrifice. Everyone's sacrifice suffered a little so that no one had to suffer a lot. Now, in our case, we did a furlough program, a month without pay. People got to choose, but it reduced the pressure, the financial pressure on our organization to go through that 2-year span so that we didn't have to lay anyone off. Everyone took a pay cut, but in this case, it was through the furlough program. I bring this concept up as you're all wrestling with these about, is it a reduction in pay? Is it a 401k match suspension? Is it across the board pay cuts? How am I thinking about someone who's economically pretty well off versus someone who's in an entry-level job? The idea, though, the concept that Barry-Wehmiller used is often talked about. I know it's not exactly the same. I know your organization is probably different, but just thinking about the concept of shared sacrifice perhaps puts us in a little bit different lens about how we are actually going to react during these times. Sarah?
Our second kind of category in Act with Compassion is this idea of seeking to understand. For us, we would say that the most helpful thing a person can do is to listen. I want to be really specific about what we mean by how am I helping you when I'm choosing to kind of go into listening mode. When we are under stress, as humans, when we are under stress, the majority of us are walking around with a balance of logic and emotion. For most of us, it's not actually 50-50. Some of us are more logical, some of us are a little bit more emotional, but we have homeostasis that's true for us. As we move throughout our day, as we absorb change, as these announcements are coming out, we experience emotion. And when that happens, we actually squeeze out the logic. And so we know this to be true because we're in highly, highly emotional situations. Think of a confrontation or perhaps a fight. This is why later on, when I've fully processed it, I think to myself, I know exactly what I should have said. And I don't know why I couldn't think of it at the time, but now it seems crystal clear to me. Well, likely we've kind of returned to our own homeostasis, but in the moment, my logic is being squeezed out. One of the ways that we can show up for the people kind of in our span of care as we're making and triaging all of these decisions is to kind of quickly go into listening mode that allows the emotion to vent out, and it allows the person to return to whatever their sense of balance is. I want to give you a very kind of practical, more business-related example, and it actually happened to us a couple of days ago with one of our vendors. And so as Matt mentioned, for us, our business, it evaporated. In about a 2-week time frame, everything that we had planned for this year is suddenly gone, and we're replanning our business. This particular vendor, we had a regular monthly scheduled call. We hopped on the call, and they kind of proceeded as if things were normal. And so we gently asked some questions around, what can you provide us given all of the guidance that you've given up until this point has made sense, and now ultimately the world has changed around us. And the input that they gave us back was essentially, well, we need you to take a long-term view. Well, in this current environment, the emotion that rose up for us was I'd put the word complete frustration on it, to the extent that we just ended the call. And to be kind of honest, from our standpoint, we don't look at the people who are guiding the call as at fault. We also look at them as saying, you never received training from your organization on how to handle this. they couldn't fall into listening mode. We weren't asked a bunch of open-ended questions. There was no concern for where we were at as a business. So a complete business example, if we're not teaching our customer-facing, our client-facing team in these skills, it's difficult for them to reduce the stress for the people that they serve. This is also true for all of our human relationships. Can we return to that listening mode? When we do so, we have to do so with empathy. Empathy is to feel it as you feel it, to think it like you think it. By a dictionary definition standpoint, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. So what does this look like in kind of a practical sense? There's some empathetic responses and there's some non-empathetic responses. Empathetic responses during this time, it looks like understanding, recognizing, and accepting. So things that you can say, it sounds like you're saying, what can I do to help? Before I jump to a conclusion, I want to say, I want to make sure I understand where you're coming from. Can you tell me more about? I can just simply recognize that this is difficult for all of us. It's a tough situation. Thanks for telling me. How are you dealing with that? Before I kind of give you my solution, somebody is talking and talking. Well, how are you dealing with? What's your first move? Accepting, I hear you. I can see where you're coming from, and I appreciate your perspective. Non-empathetic responses, dominating, just get on with it. That's what you need to do. Well, we're all in that boat together, rowing in the same direction. I need you to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. Avoiding, this is a huge one for right now. Like, stop worrying, you'll be fine. I'm sure it'll all work out. This has to end sometime. For most of us, not helpful, given the amount of uncertainty. And my personal favorite, which would be judging. Are you serious? I wouldn't have done it that way. I'm surprised you did that. As I give you kind of the second skill in this category, the question is, what is the number one thing employees say their direct leader could give them to inspire them to produce great work? What is the number one thing employees say their direct leader could give them to inspire them to produce great work? Your choices are going to be increased pay, promotion, recognition, autonomy, training, or perhaps a treadmill desk. All right. Recognition. It's the number one thing. And if you think about it in that contrast with that first answer of increased pay, that first one, that's going to be difficult for a lot of us for the time being. But recognition is something that I literally cannot run out of. So when we think about recognition, we come from the standpoint of, one, people just want to know that who they are and what they do matters. Essentially, does anybody see me? If you're in the situation that you have a lot of people who are working from home, this becomes even more critical, even more important. Literally, I'm not being seen. And so what are the mechanisms we're putting in place to increase recognition and celebration? And we also believe that recognition is your most abundant resource. If it is genuine, if it's proportional, if it's timely, you literally cannot do enough of it. There's none of us that are out there that says, please stop with the genuine, proportional, timely recognition. There's three categories that we want you to think about when you're thinking of what to recognize. The middle one, excellence or achievement, is the one that we tend to fall into, and it's really important things to recognize, but they're also the things that are the easiest. It's the things that we can see. Deadline completion, sales orders, and perhaps during this time, people who are kind of adapting really quickly and performing. And you should absolutely recognize those things. But if you only do achievement, you're missing out on 2/3. The first that we would call you to is effort. And so energy invested along the way, and we would say regardless of outcome. In this situation, a lot of us don't know how it's going to turn out, and so we literally can't predict the outcome. But I recognize just kind of the toiling away and the energy invested. I also want to recognize the example. And to Matt's point earlier, if I'm going to start with my values, I want to use recognition to say, here's where I saw you living those values for the team, for the organization. I also want to do it using this particular formula. So rather than going around saying, good job, good job, good job, I want you to use 3 components. The first is the primary feelings. How do I feel about what you did? I want to name the specific behavior, and I want to talk about the impact. So this example is, Jennifer, I'm grateful and inspired. Those are your emotions. Those are your feelings. By your willingness to ask questions, that's the behavior, and share your thoughts on how to improve our client communications. Your curiosity and informed contributions, This is the impact, really important, make us a more collaborative team that serves our clients in even better ways. If I want my team to lean in, if I want them to do great work, if I want them to repeat the behaviors that are really, really good, I need to share how I'm feeling about it. I need to be very specific about what those behaviors are. And I really want to talk about the ripple effect. Because for some of us, if I'm not quite sure if this is having an impact, I'm not necessarily sure if I'm going to repeat it in the exact same way. Really, really highly effective. When we do this in class with a group of people, we'll typically give about 7 or 8 minutes and people can write out a message. And so then even a lot of us are in a huge time crunch, starting and ending our day this way. If you've got a remote workforce, we'd recommend that you handwrite the note out, actually text a photo of it. It means and it matters to people that you took the time to write it out. If, and I know this is a Herculean effort for most of us to find a stamp, but if you're able to put it in the mail, we have a lot of people who are working from home who would highly, highly appreciate finding something in their mailbox from somebody who says, I see you and I see what you're doing. We also know that recognition from your direct leader is 8 times more powerful than recognition from other sources. So if you're a leader that has a span of care, doing this really, really matters. So I'm going to seek to understand, and I'm going to increase my recognition and celebration.
So act with compassion was one, communicate clearly is the next one. So as we look at increasing communication, the more I communicate now, especially in times where there's uncertainty, if people don't know what's happening, they're going to make something up. I'm going to fill that void. So in times of stress, there's no difference if I'm a civilian organization, a military organization. There are some things that I can do. One, and first and foremost, I'm going to start with my people. I'm going to be concerned about my people's health and welfare. Number 2, I'm going to be very transparent. I'm going to say what I know and what I don't. As an example, in the Air Force, I did a study to try and figure out where do people receive the most trusted information. The most trusted information was received from peer group. Number 2 was unauthorized blog posts. At the very, very bottom was official communications. And the reason that is for a lot of organizations, our official communications, we try and put a spin around it, and we use a whole bunch of words. The next one, establish a rhythm. I'm going to have daily touch points, either written or video. And it might feel, especially for those of you in leadership, it might feel like, oh man, I'm so tired of hearing myself talk. You probably are, but your people are not. They need to hear it constantly. A care for people starting out, very transparency about what you don't know and what you do, and that rhythm. And the last one is selecting the right format. So I will tell you, email is fantastic for facts, figures, numbers, those type of things. Anything doing with emotions or feelings, email is just not a good venue for that. I recommend phone call, and then of course, video even better because you can pick up on the nonverbals a little better. Let's get tactical about this, shall we? So team huddle, this is a very typical agenda that we will use. And I know we're talking about leading through coronavirus and times of uncertainty. We'll use a very similar agenda to meet all kind of personality behavioral styles as well. So you can see those numbered right there. I'm going to start with what's going right. For a lot of leaders, they were promoted into their positions because they solved problems. They're good problem solvers. If I'm a good problem solver and I was no different, then what am I looking for? I'm looking for things going wrong that I can make better. I need to stop and at least in the beginning say, I'm going to catch you doing something right. Sarah's comment about I see you. People want to know that who they are and what they do matters. I get that in these times of change, we're going to go down a lot of different lanes here, and sometimes it's not going to be the best one, or it can always be made better. At the same time, I'm going to find out and point out what's going right. Next one I'm going to do is just say, what's the new communication? What are the necessary announcements? Any change in policies? Even if there aren't any, I'm going to say there are no changes. I'm going to ask and have the question about how can we use this time and change to serve our people, our customers, our communities, those type of things. For us, this webinar would be a really good example of that. Number 4, what should each person be individually focused on? And then last is personal connection. I don't always get to this because I time block this. At the very end is, I just want people to have a chance to talk. But I don't want that to be at the beginning because we have some serious things I have to work through. But I do want to keep it there for people who need to connect. And if I know it's coming, then I'm not going to jump in the beginning and start talking about how my weekend was or what's going on that I saw in the news when I know I have a chance to do it at the end. Some rules. Designated meeting leader, have a note taker. I know this seems really basic, But the number of organizations we work with that, one, don't start on time and two, don't end on time is about 90%. We work with a lot of companies, from pro sports teams to major airlines all over the world, start on time, end on time. We would offer, especially for bandwidth, the leader should always be on video. Everyone at the bandwidth can accommodate that. Keep your line muted while others are talking. The other one there is using the chat function for larger groups. We would use this in the military. We'd have 1,000 people on a chat room, and people would be talking, and we would be triaging what were the most prevalent questions to answer. So this works in large groups as well if you use some of these rules and structure. I refer to people by name rather than by the department. I know it's very efficient to say, let's now hear from sales, let's hear from marketing, let's hear from operations. It's much more personal, especially now when we're distributed all over the place, to start with, let's hear from Jim, let's hear from Sally, let's hear from Jane. Much more personal. We can start with the first name. And the last part there, as I mentioned, when the time is up, anyone gets to leave. Those are the rules. You name those rules so that if you're the leader and you're still talking about something, it's okay that people literally get up and leave, because we're going to be much more efficient in how we're doing this. All right, I'm going to move us on into some feedback to increase communication. What do you think of when someone comes to your workplace and says, I have some feedback for you? The first thing, I want you to think about the first thing someone says. I got some feedback for you. You haven't asked for it. You're just sitting there. It's a cup of coffee. You're doing some work. And all of a sudden, someone comes in and says, I have feedback for you. If I say, hey, I have some feedback from you, a lot of you is, oh, whatever, I'm going to build up a defense. About half of you said, what complaint do you have now? So let me ask a different question. What if I were to ask it, what about if somebody comes into your workplace and says, hey, I'm interested. I'd like your feedback on this. What do you think when someone says, hey, I'd like your feedback on this? What's your first gut reaction? First gut reaction, same thing. You haven't even had your coffee. You just sat down in the morning. It's a work day. You've got a whole bunch of things going on. And someone comes in and says, I'd like your feedback on this. So to go from, I've got feedback for you, right into, hey, I'm interested in your feedback. When asked for feedback, when asked for opinion, when asked for input, the same areas associated with receiving a reward light up. I know a lot of us have been told feedback is a gift. The true gift is asking for feedback. I want to know, according to SurveyMonkey research with Adam Grant, what percentage of their employees feel understood by their managers? Just 47% feel like their manager understands them. The ability for a leader to ask for feedback is so powerful. It builds trust. It gets the manager to build that empathy that Sara was mentioning, and you make better decisions as well. Here are some tactical ways you can ask for feedback from your team members. Hey, how's the new work from home policy going? If that's applicable to you all. Project priorities, how are they? Do you understand what your number one priority is when you have extra time? Or do you understand what the ranking order is? How's our clarity of communication? I want some feedback on that. How can I better support you in your role as your leader? How can I better support you? What ideas do you have? How can you make this idea better? So sometimes we get stuck in, I don't like something or I like it. And if it's binary like that, I say, great, then make this one better. I want feedback for you. I'll lead you into that. And then what concerns do you have from your perspective? Let's transition into what feedback can we ask for clients. Sara mentioned the call we were on with one of our vendors. So when we started out, it was no different with this webinar. And I know we're doing it distributed with 40-something of you, but we're asking, what's your opinion? How's the information you're getting from us? This is you as your organization talking to a client. How's the information going that you're getting from us? How is it? Is the information, this is leading, and I'm getting right down to the point here, but is the information you're getting from us helpful in your current situation? Because I want to have some empathy, so I literally want their feedback on it. What do you see as a gap in how we're serving you right now? What's your most pressing concern? What concerns do you have from your perspective? I literally want to understand them more as a person and as an organization. So that's how we increase that communication, the feedback side.
Right, and our final category, we have act with compassion, communicate clearly, and decide intentionally. So most of us, while we are caring for our people, we are also caring for our business and asking a lot of questions around how am I going to revise my strategic plan? What is the world going to look like when we're all out of quarantine? Is my business going to be different? And so you all mentioned from the beginning poll question, the majority of us is going to either have somewhere between a medium and a drastic change. And so how do we kind of triage all of these decisions that we're facing? The first, we're going to give you 3 tool sets. The first one is if I'm trying to bring a group together, or perhaps I'm just thinking about a particular situation or decision I'm trying to make, I'm going to ask myself these questions. What do I control? What do I influence? And what can't you control? So we built out this example just on the COVID-19 situation. I can't control, none of us can, unless you happen to be a hand sanitizer company out there on the call. Most of us can't control hand sanitizer availability. I can heavily influence employees' perspectives. I can heavily influence my customer client perspectives. I can control, perhaps depending on the role that I'm in, the company response or perhaps my policies or procedures. When we run this activity on pretty much any decision or any problem that we're trying to solve, what we tend to find out, what we can't control, tends to be a few things: the economy, the weather. What we control completely, depending on role, tends to be a few things, but what we influence tends to be the biggest group. And so triaging down into what are all the creative things that we can do that we can influence the situation that we're in. So this is a way to break down any of the problems that you happen to be facing. The second one that I'm going to give you is thinking about what's urgent versus what's important. And so urgent being defined as tasks that require kind of immediate attention. Oftentimes these are tasks that are deadline driven and tasks that you are being handed. Perhaps it's a customer or client that's handing you this and it is incredibly urgent. Perhaps it's something to serve your team. Versus important, which is a task that contributes to the long-term mission, values, and goals of your organization or your business. If I put those and drop them into a simple 2x2, it allows me to kind of look at the things that are on my plate and kind of put them into buckets. So those things that are urgent and important for most of us, that's customers, clients, I'm going to do those first. Anything that's important but not urgent, I'm going to schedule. And so while most of us were in a firefight this week, am I breaking out time next week and the week after to gather together virtually and look at the strategic plan, look at my goals for the business? Not important but yet urgent. I'm going to choose to delegate those things if I can. And is there anything that is both not important, not urgent, essentially that I can shed? And that's probably a new list of things that I can just completely eliminate. So this is the Eisenhower decision matrix. And it's a tool that you can use, and it's a tool that you can give your people. If you're getting asked the question, what should I be working on? And how do I prioritize my work? And then the third one is incredibly simple, but it's ask why, tell why. We actually got this from a client organization, and they invented it basically to address the challenge of a very senior partnership group and a very young team that was growing rapidly. And they realized we have a lot of context and information that we're not so great at sharing, and that the burden on leadership is to constantly tell why. When I'm sending that email with the 10-point plan, or I'm announcing a decision, the burden on the decision maker is to give the logic, the background, and the context. The burden on those team members who perhaps weren't in the room, rather than assuming negative intent, none of us are perfect and we're going to miss it sometimes. So what I need from those people is I need you to ask me why. And so this particular organization used to carry mugs, coffee mugs around that would say, ask why, tell why. And if we both sides, decision makers and non-decision makers, kind of have this as a team norm, what happens is we don't have as much judgment. We don't make as much assumptions. It's easier to have a positive mindset to say, perhaps you just forgot to tell me, so I'm going to ask why. And as from a leadership standpoint, am I going to kind of over communicate, increase, go to 11, and I'm going to constantly be telling why. So ask why, tell why is a really simple one to essentially kind of double down on, especially during times when we've got people under stress, we've got people who are in the box, and we've got people who are processing quite a lot. So these are 3 quick tools that you can use when you're thinking about how do I move through all the decisions that I'm making and that we're facing right now. The last thing, a poll question we're going to ask you, the question is that 69% of C-suite respondents say that employees have no barriers to asking questions at their companies. What % of employees agree with this statistics? In fact, it is 50%. So essentially, let's just assume, this may or may not be true in your organization, but what this is saying is half of all team members believe that there is a barrier to asking questions. So if you think, I don't need to ask why, tell why, I don't need to give my people permission, this would say that about half your people, they're kind of asking for it. So this is a good one to kind of roll out as a new team norm.
Thanks, Sarah. And as we look at how we lead through coronavirus, COVID-19, this would be no different. And you would say, well, wait a second. In deployments in the Middle East and deployments in West Africa, you would use these same tool sets? Absolutely. Number one, I want to act with compassion. If I want mission accomplishment, if I want great customer service, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my team and I'm going to act this way to every stakeholder that I have in my span of care. I'm going to communicate very clearly. I'm going to increase the communication and my listening. I'm going to ask for feedback constantly. I'm going to make some very intentional decisions. I'm going to ensure that I ask why and tell why, especially because whether it's hierarchy, the newness, or the stress of the change that's going on, I can't rely or actually put the pressure on my people that it's up to them to ask the questions. I want to constantly be asking that question and providing some context. In the end, when we look back upon this event and how long it lasts, the virus is one thing, but then afterwards and where that goes is another. And so as we look back, though, this is what people are going to remember.
Thanks for listening to the Everybody Matters podcast. Again, if you would like any resources from Chapman & Co. Leadership Institute, or if you'd like to find out more about them, go to their website, ccoleadership.com. And if you'd like to find out more about Bob Chapman and Ron Sizodia's book, Everybody Matters, The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family, go to everybodymattersbook.com. And during this time, you may want some inspiration, and you may want some insight into issues you're having, decisions that you're making, or decisions that have been thrust upon you that you're struggling with. So make sure to visit us on the web at Barry-Wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and definitely our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening. Hang in there, stay safe, and don't forget, Everybody Matters is the only business idea with truly unlimited potential.